The relationship with Dean ends in 1956. The partnership ends in 1956.
10 years to the day.
To the day. But you guys don't see each other again for 20 years.
20 years.
Until the MDA telethon in 1976.
Hollywood called it one of the biggest feuds in entertainment history. For decades, people believed Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis hated each other. They were wrong because behind their most famous feud was a friendship neither man ever truly let go.
You and me, we're gonna be partners. You and me, we're gonna be pals. You and me, when other friendships fail.
Then Dean Martin died, and everything Jerry Lewis had spent years trying not to say suddenly came pouring out. So what really happened between Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis? And what did Dean say before he died that changed everything? Join us as we uncover what Dean Martin has finally revealed about Jerry. Two guys, a pastrami sandwich, and a set list written on a bag. The first time Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis performed together, they had no rehearsal, no set list, and approximately 2 hours to figure out what they were going to do. They used the time to eat pastrami sandwiches and write bits on the torn open bag the food came in. They met in 1944 at the Glass Hat Club at the Belmont Plaza Hotel in New York City, where both men were performing as separate acts. Martin was a nightclub singer, handsome and smooth, operating with an effortless cool that made every room feel like it had been waiting for him to show up. Lewis was a comic act built around lip-syncing to records. A kid from Newark, so insecure and so desperate to be liked that he had developed an entire physical language of clowning just to keep audiences from looking away. Lewis saw Martin on the street in March 1945, wearing a camel hair coat, looking like something out of a magazine. He wrote later in his memoir that men don't like to admit it, but there's something about a truly handsome guy who also happens to be truly masculine that's magnetic. He said, "That's what I want to be like. Maybe if I hang around with him, some of that'll rub off on me." They debuted as a duo at the 500 Club in Atlantic City on July 25, 1946, when Lewis suggested to the club owner that Martin would be a good replacement for a singer who was unavailable that night. Martin agreed. They had 2 hours before the second show. Lewis grabbed the pastrami bag, tore it open, and wrote a list of bits he remembered from his father's burlesque performances. They went on. Martin didn't miss a beat. They did 2 hours and 20 minutes, and the audience lost their minds. What happened in that room was not craft. It was chemistry, the kind that cannot be manufactured and cannot be predicted, and that, when it appears, is completely self-evident to everyone who witnesses it. Martin and Lewis were the hottest act in America during the early 1950s, as well as the highest-paid act in show business, according to a 1951 Life magazine article. The duo was featured in that magazine while on its most successful movie tour, promoting "That's My Boy." The tour was so successful that audience members would not leave their seats, so Martin and Lewis began doing free shows afterward on fire escapes and out of their dressing room windows, jamming the streets with adoring fans hoping to catch a hat, a shoe, maybe an autograph. Dean's fans were men, women, and the Italian community. Jerry's fans were women, Jewish audiences, and children. Martin and Lewis together were all of them, every demographic that existed. A 1951 Life profile described them as the hottest act in America. Television, radio, 16 films for Paramount. Everything they touched turned into something the public consumed and demanded more of. For a while, it felt permanent, like these two people had found the version of entertainment that neither of them could have reached alone. Like the whole arrangement was too functional to ever stop working. So how did two men with that kind of chemistry end up in the same building for years without speaking to each other? And what was actually building underneath the surface long before it finally broke? The straight man who wasn't just a straight man. The public image of Dean and Jerry assigned roles that were clean and simple. Jerry was the funny one. Dean was the handsome one who set up the jokes and sang the songs. The press ran with it, and Dean Martin, for years, absorbed it without fully showing how much it cost him. By 1956, the plots of their films had become startlingly predictable. Dean sang 2 songs and got the pretty girl. Jerry got all the laughs, the best scenes, and the storylines. The critical reviews had settled into a pattern where reviewers praised Jerry's brilliant comedy and described Dean as a mediocre singer who was an afterthought in the film. Dean had grown to hate the Dean and Jerry films, telling people privately that he felt he played an idiot in all of them. Jerry later said in interviews that he had spent their entire partnership privately lobbying critics and journalists to give Dean more credit, furious that the press kept positioning Dean as the straight man while treating Lewis as the genius. He said in a 2005 interview that he took on the press for often slighting Dean while lauding Jerry throughout their partnership. He understood that the imbalance in the critical reception was damaging to Dean long before Dean told him directly. He just could not fix it. Jerry described watching Martin work in the most impressive terms. He wrote in his memoir that the vast majority of comedians with good rhythm use beats, small hesitations to set up their jokes. He said Dean didn't use beats. He just talked. And the laughs came. Jerry called it being in the presence of magic. He was not saying this to be polite. He was saying it because it was true, and because he spent his entire life after the partnership ended trying to make sure other people knew it. But there was another dimension to what was happening inside the Martin and Lewis dynamic, one that Lewis himself identified as the thing that poisoned it from the inside. It was not Dean's resentment. It was Jerry's ego. And it arrived in the form of a single book about Charlie Chaplin. Dean later complained he read a book about Chaplin. At some point, Jerry said to himself, "I'm exactly like Chaplin," and from then on, no one could tell him anything. Dean's observation about the Chaplin comparison was not about creative ambition. It was about the change in Jerry's personality that the ambition produced. The moment the funny kid from the 500 Club became someone who believed his own mythology so completely that the people around him stopped being collaborators and started being obstacles. And simultaneously, outside forces were whispering in both their ears. So who was telling them they did not need each other? And what did that do to a partnership that had been built entirely on the fact of each other? The people who poisoned it and the dollar sign that ended it. Jerry said in an interview with the Associated Press that they were finally divided by outside factions. Someone said to Dean, "You don't need him. Why don't you just sing and do films yourself?" And Jerry was getting the same message from the other direction. What do you need him for? The entertainment industry of the 1950s had no shortage of people who saw two very successful men and calculated that they might be more commercially useful separated than together. Jerry described both of them absorbing this messaging over time, and both of them knowing it was happening, and neither of them being strong enough in that moment to push back against it. He said, "I hated him for allowing the split to happen. He hated me for allowing the split to happen." The final year of their partnership was documented by people who were present as a period of genuine mutual hostility that no longer had the warmth underneath it to absorb the friction. During the filming of Hollywood or Bust in the spring and summer of 1956, Jerry later said that he wouldn't tell Dean what he thought of him, so the director Frank Tashlin took all the flack for both of them. They were no longer communicating directly about what was wrong. They were performing for the camera, while the actual relationship disintegrated in the spaces between takes. Dean, at one point, said to Jerry directly, "You're nothing to me but a fucking $sign." That sentence has been quoted in every account of the Martin and Lewis breakup ever written, because it is the sentence that contains everything that had gone wrong between them. The last straw came when they were scheduled to star in The Delicate Delinquent. Dean was supposed to play a policeman, a role he did not want, so he said no. Jerry told him they would just get someone else. Dean said, "Start looking, boy," and walked away. The split was announced to a stunned public while they still had millions of dollars in contracts and bookings ahead of them. They walked away from all of it. Their final performance as a duo happened at the Copacabana in New York City on July 25, 1956, 10 years to the day from their first appearance at the 500 Club in Atlantic City. They closed their act singing "Pardners," the title song from one of their last films. "You and me will be the greatest partners, buddies, and pals." After that, they exited stage right and stage left, and did not speak to each other for 20 years. The night before the final performance, Jerry walked across the hallway to Dean's room in the hotel to ask for some ice. They wished each other a good show. Jerry left the room. He wrote later, "I was losing my best friend, and I didn't know why." 20 years of silence followed that sentence. So what did those 20 years actually look like from the inside? And how did two men who had been inseparable manage to exist in the same industry without speaking? 20 years of silence. That was never actually silence. The public version of the Dean and Jerry breakup was that two egos collided, two careers diverged, and two men moved on with their lives. The private version was considerably messier, considerably more painful, and considerably more mutual in its suffering than either of them was willing to admit publicly at the time. Dean would often see Jerry around the Paramount lot, riding in his golf cart. According to the Nick Tosh's biography Dino, Jerry would outright avoid Dean if he saw him coming the same way. That went on until Dean cornered him once and said, "Enough is enough." Even their avoidance of each other required planning and effort. They were still in each other's orbit constantly. They just refused to acknowledge it directly. Dean rarely spoke about Jerry in interviews. Jerry, by contrast, wore his emotions publicly and admitted later that he changed accounts and embellished stories as he aged, which means the Jerry Lewis version of the 20 years of silence is simultaneously the most detailed account available. What can be said with certainty is that both of them were succeeding. Dean went on to become a recording artist at Capitol and Reprise, an actor in serious films like Rio Bravo and The Young Lions, a member of the Rat Pack alongside Frank Sinatra and Sammy Davis Jr., and the host of The Dean Martin Show, a television variety series that ran from 1965 to 1974 and was enormously popular. Jerry directed The Bellboy and The Nutty Professor, became Paramount's biggest star for a period, and developed a massive following in France, where he was celebrated as a comic auteur in terms that American critics had never applied to him. The silence broke in September 1976, and it broke because Frank Sinatra decided it had gone on long enough. So what did Frank Sinatra do? How did he pull it off? And what did Jerry Lewis say when Dean Martin walked out from behind a curtain and the whole thing became national news? Frank Sinatra hit a man in a dressing room and changed everything. The reunion happened during Jerry Lewis's annual Labor Day telethon for the Muscular Dystrophy Association in September 1976. Frank Sinatra walked onto the stage and told the audience he had a friend who loved what they did every year. He said only that. And then Dean Martin walked out. Lewis, standing in front of the cameras with no preparation and no warning that this was about to happen, looked up at the ceiling and silently asked God to give him something to say. What came out was, "So, you working?" Dean Martin, without missing a beat, said, "I'm working." Deana Martin, Dean's daughter, later revealed that Frank had hidden Dean in Ed McMahon's dressing room before the surprise. Dean's presence backstage had been briefly spotted by Jerry's son, Gary Lewis, but Gary chose not to tell his father, keeping the secret intact. The reunion was national news. According to Jerry, the two spoke every day after that. But even the daily phone calls did not fully repair what had broken. Both men didn't really make amends until the death of Dean's son in a plane crash in 1987. And their friendship until Dean's death in 1995 could only be described as casual at best. The reunion had been a beginning, not a conclusion. The real work of whatever reconciliation was possible between them was still ahead. Their last public reunion happened in 1989, on Dean Martin's 72nd birthday, at Bally's Hotel and Casino in Las Vegas. Jerry arrived with a birthday cake, thanked Dean for all the joy he had given the world across his career, and then grinned and said, "Why we broke up? I'll never know." It was a joke. It was also the most honest thing either of them had said publicly about the split in 33 years. Neither of them knew, not entirely, and neither of them had ever fully agreed on a single explanation for it. So when did the real emotional reckoning finally happen between them? And what did Dean actually say to Jerry when the walls finally came down? The phone call that Dean never expected to make. On March 21, 1987, Dean Paul Martin, Dean's son from his first marriage, was killed when his F-4C Phantom jet crashed into Mount San Gorgonio during a training exercise with the Air National Guard. He was 35 years old. Jerry Lewis went to the funeral without telling anyone he was coming. He sat in the back. He did not make himself known to Dean. He attended privately and left without speaking to the man he had once called his best friend, because he understood that this was not a moment for himself and that his presence should be invisible if Dean needed it to be. When Dean found out that Lewis had been there, he called him. According to Lewis, recounted in both his memoir and his AP radio interview, Dean said, "Don't you understand? I just lost one of the only two male loves I had in my life. Him and you." That was the first time Dean had ever said that directly. Jerry said he had always known Dean showed it, that it was just difficult for Dean to say. After his son's death, Dean Martin became increasingly reclusive. Jerry described him in this final period as withdrawn and genuinely grieving in a way that the earlier version of Dean, the performing version, had never permitted. The drinking that had always been a rumor became a reality. The man who had sung about the good life was no longer interested in the performance of enjoying it. Dean Martin died on Christmas Day, 1995. He was 78 years old. The cause of death was acute respiratory failure secondary to emphysema. And what Dean Martin revealed about Jerry Lewis in the years before he died was not a single statement or a single interview. It was the accumulated truth of a man who called his estranged partner after his son's funeral and said there had been two loves in his life, and that Jerry Lewis was one of them. So when Jerry Lewis finally put all of this into a book, a decade after Dean died, what did he actually say? And what is the version of Dean Martin that Lewis spent his last years trying to make the world understand? The truth Jerry Lewis spent 10 years writing. In 2005, Jerry Lewis published Dean and Me, a love story, a memoir about the partnership and everything that surrounded it. He described writing the book as feeling Dean in the room with him, sitting in the big chair in his office every time he wrote about the two of them. He said it took him 10 years to finally decide he had enough. In the AP radio interview he gave while promoting the book, Jerry described the stupidity of the 20 years of silence in terms that did not leave him off the hook. The stupidity of that I cannot expound on. The ignorance of that is something I hope I'll always forget. He was not blaming Dean for the silence. He was blaming both of them equally. They had both listened to the wrong people. They had both let go of something that neither of them could find again with anyone else. When Dean died, Jerry wrote, "I lost my partner and my best friend. The man who made me the man I am today. I think of him with undying respect. I miss him every day. I'm still here." Lewis died on August 20th, 2017. He was 91 years old. He had outlived Dean by 22 years and spent most of those years doing exactly what the book promised, making sure the world knew who Dean Martin actually was. What really drove Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis apart after becoming one of entertainment's most successful duos? Why did Jerry Lewis spend the rest of his life talking about Dean Martin, even decades after they went their separate ways? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.